So we are in a series called Home for the Holidays, and we're jumping off of Luke chapter 2, where Joseph and Mary, in the very first Christmas that ever happened, there was a census that went out, and they went home for the holidays. And we kind of pulled a little bit apart in that verse, in that section of verses in Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through about 7 or so. And Jesus is born at Joseph's hometown, which is this town of Bethlehem, and there's a lot of kind of speculation about what happened when that happened, but a lot of what we understand in that story is that Joseph going to his hometown would have gone home, and there probably would have been family, there probably would have been some people to stay with, there probably would have at least been some relatives or some distant relatives, but you know that your family's probably dysfunctional when you go to have a baby, and they're like, yeah, you should stay in the barn. We know that you're in childbirth. We know that you're in labor. We know this is a big deal. A kid is being born. But, go sit by the goats and the cows and the chickens. And so that is to say that this entire series, in another way said, is how to function in the dysfunction of your family during the holidays. How to function in the dysfunction of your family during the holidays. Because every single one of us has dysfunction in our family. Some of us, we have a little bit of dysfunction. Some of us, we have a lot of dysfunction. But we all have dysfunction. We all said this equal playing field because every single one of us, when you took someone home, a significant other home for the holidays for the very first time, you gave your significant other a heads up. He said, let me tell you about the cousin. Let me tell you about the uncle. Let me tell you about the aunt. In fact, some of you guys, you're thinking, how do I prep them? Because it's kind of a gentle balance. You want to let them know that your family's weird, but not so much that they think that you're weird, right? Like, you want them to know that some things are going to be a little bit wonky this Christmas. However, you also want them to know that, but I'm cool. So, I know that they're going to be a reflection, but don't let them be a reflection of me. I'm the normal one in our family. And we talked about this last week. This is so important. That when it comes to the dysfunction in our families, we have to acknowledge that we are also dysfunctional. And granted, you might be less dysfunctional than the people around you. You might be less dysfunctional than the people who are your cousins or who your aunts or who your uncles, who that's one, there's that one black sheep in the family. And if you don't have a black sheep in the family, it's probably because you're the black sheep in the family. You just haven't had the self-awareness to realize that yet, right? But we all have that person, and we all are that person in different ways, shapes, and forms. And so the idea behind this series is real simple. It's how do we function in the dysfunction in our family? How do we function in the dysfunction in our family? And today, I want to talk about something and read a passage where Jesus is going to display some incredible leadership. He's going to display some incredible example of how we are to live and how we are to act. Because if we're being honest, where this gets really difficult is when it comes to people who are in opposition to us. Right? There's some things that kind of bug you and that drive you nuts, and perhaps for you it's just like small things that drive you nuts where, somebody asks you if you want a third helping of food and a fourth helping of food, and then when you don't say yes to a fifth helping of food, they're like, oh, it's like you killed their puppy or something. And for some of us, there's a lot of dysfunction, but when we face opposition is when we oftentimes bow up. And this year, we said this last week, this year, I think more than any other year, we have the potential for incredible conflict. Because this year, more than any other year, there have been such a confluence of events that have happened between COVID-19 and everything that has gone along with that, between all of the understanding of the civil unrest and the racial inequalities and injustices. And for a lot of us, there's the political cycle of Republicans and Democrats and conservatives and liberals. And when you come together with your family, sometimes this is what you think. And I won't tell your family this, but perhaps as you're viewing online, you're like sitting across from the person on the couch and you're thinking this at the same time, which is, how are we raised in the same family, right? Like you sitting there and you thought I know we came from the same womb, and you don't want to get that personal, right? But like I know that we came from the same spot, but I have no clue how we are in and came from the same family, because you are oftentimes in diametric opposition to the people who you know. And the problem is, and I don't have to tell you this, but let me just tell you this because of the fact that this helps us to understand what we face when we go home. We face a world where we do not like to interact with people in ideological opposition of us. Isn't that right? We do not like to exist. We do not like to interact. We avoid interaction. We avoid existence with people who are ideologically in opposition to us. Jesus was, talking often, and he would say something like this: love, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, or, love the person that loves you, but, hate the person that hates you. And he would say this: no, I want you to love and I want you to serve your enemy. I don't know about you, when I was a little kid, I thought enemies were everywhere, right? Like, I thought enemies were going to be a big deal. I thought every person on planet Earth had, like, a sworn enemy. I don't know who walked in and is like, dude, I have an enemy. Like, not just like the enemy, Satan, right? Like, you're like, no, Phil is my enemy, right? Susan is my enemy, whoever. Like I don't know if you walked in with an enemy, but not many of us actually have, like, this person is my enemy. What we have is ideological enemies. What we have is I'm on the conservative end, and those on the liberal end are my enemy. Or I'm more on the liberal end of politics, and those on the conservative end are my enemies. I'm on the thought process that Black lives matter, and I understand that all lives matter, but I'm saying specifically Black lives often feel like they don't matter, or you're at the point where you're saying, I don't see how you could say that because I think all lives matter, right? Ideologically, when we face someone who is in diametric opposition to us, it creates something inside of us that bows up. And the problem is a lot of times in life you can avoid that, right? A lot of times you can just kind of avoid it. You can just not talk about it. But here's what happens at the holidays. About day one, you're coming home and everybody's handshakes and hugs and high fives. You graduate and they're like, awesome. We're so proud of you. You did a phenomenal job. What did you get your degree in? They're like, art. And you're like, never mind, I'm sorry, you'll figure it out someday. But you kind of go along, and day one, it's nice. Day two, it's okay. And about day three, right, stuff starts getting real. You kind of lost all the pleasantries, all the nicenesses. You've caught up, and you started to aggravate each other. And then the junk comes out, the filth comes out, the ideological opposition comes out. Because for most of us in life, the only time that we really face face-to-face ideological opposition is online. And it's not face-to-face. But in family, in holidays, we face people who we cannot avoid. In fact, here is the good thing about the series, is it goes so much deeper than the holidays. Because it's not simply about ideological opposition in theory. This is about how do you love people who think just totally different than you. Now, Jesus faced this all the time. He faced it all the time as he would walk and as he would talk. And one of the kind of the underlying plots that happens throughout Scripture is Jesus actually faced this in his inner circle. And we're going to read a story today about what Jesus did just before he was about to die. Just before he was about to die, John, in the book of John, he's recording Jesus' life, and he records the last 24 hours of Jesus' life in incredible detail. And he talks about the last meal that they were about to have together. And they were just getting ready and just getting prepared for this meal. And I want to read to you this tension that John draws out of this story, that there is someone who is standing in opposition to Jesus. So this is what happens. John chapter 13, verse 1. He says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." So John qualifies it and says, okay, Jesus knows. They're about to eat this meal. Jesus knows that the end is imminent. Jesus knows on the other side of this meal, there's going to be some prayer in the garden, but Jesus knows on the other side of this meal, there's going to be Roman soldiers. They're going to come arrest him. They're going to lead him. He's going to go back and forth. He's going to go, to Pilate, and he's going to be heard, and they're going to eventually send him to the cross, and he is going to be beat. He is going to be mocked. He is going to be scorned, and he is going to be crucified. Jesus knows this. And in light of Jesus knowing this, he also knows something else. During supper, and look at this detail, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So he says, okay, let me give you a little qualifier. At this point, there was already a plan in place to betray Jesus. At this point, there was already a plan in place, a thing in place, that Jesus was going to be betrayed. And we're going to find out in a few verses from now that Jesus knew that. It's not just saying, okay, chronologically, this had already been a decision, that the devil had already kind of had its way with Judas, and that this was going to happen. No, Jesus was full aware of the fact that his betrayer is sitting across from them. I love this tension. Because he's sitting at a table of intimacy with the people who ought to be the closest, with the person who perhaps would betray him the deepest. Just to be real, that's some of our house. For some of us, that's our house. You go home, and the person that you should be the closest with, or the people that you should be the closest with, oftentimes feel like they have the power and the ability to betray you the deepest. And for some of you, they have. And I love how John clues in on it and focuses in on this detail. And he says, he knew that this was about to happen, and he knew the consequence of what was about to happen. Yet and still, next verse, verse 3. And so Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. So Jesus, knowing that I have all power, all authority, and you, my friend, have betrayed me. Let me ask this. What do you do in that situation? What do you do in that situation? When you're at home and something comes up, something gets brought up, and it gets a little bit contentious, and you know that person, is for whatever reason, for whatever kind of things have happened in their past, or whatever things are happening in their present, or whatever it is, you know that this person is just, they get under your skin, they drive you nuts, they drive you crazy. It seems like their stuff that they do to you is malicious, sometimes harmful, sometimes hurtful, sometimes downright betraying. And they say something, and you know that you have the perfect answer to it, right? There's like that moment sometimes in a conversation where you're in kind of a debate, and I don't know if you like debates or not. Our family, it's kind of just like a fun intellectual sparring match, although it gets us in trouble sometimes because my dad will get into like full-on debate mode where we're like yelling, but we're like laughing at the same time. It's not always the best thing to do at, people's birthday dinners and things like that, but we think it's fun. So, sometimes that's okay in terms of just like going back and forth, but there happens oftentimes in a debate where someone says something and like, you're about to drop a bomb on them, right? You're like, oh, you just walked right into my intellectual trap, right? And you have the thing that happened, and you have the point that you're about to make, and you feel like you have all the power and all the authority, and you're about to say something, and inside, you're thinking they're going to walk away, and they are about to feel so dumb, right? And I'm about to feel so smart. And here's what you wouldn't say out loud. You're like, it's because I am smarter than you. And so John draws this attention. He says, okay, I want you to see this. I want you to see this. Jesus is about to be crucified. He sees the guy across the table from him, and he knows that this is the person that is about to crucify him. And so he says, and he acknowledges, he's aware of, he has all power, all authority in the room, and he can do whatever he wants with it to whomever he wants. And he says he gets up from the table. He rose from supper. He rose from supper, and I know we already kind of have what's happening up there, but I just want you to imagine, like, how would you fill in that next sentence? He rose from supper, and he dropped the intellectual bomb that made everybody else feel so insignificant. He rose from supper, and he reared back, and he karate chopped dude dead in the throat, right? Like how would you fill in that sentence? Because here's the point. I think we fill in that sentence opposite of what Jesus did. It says he rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. He poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, and he wiped them with the towel that was wrapped around him. So Jesus here does what is the opposite of our reaction. It's not just that he does something to serve them, but in their day and in their culture, many of you know this, in their day and in their culture, this was like the lowest thing that you could do. This was the ultimate sign of humility. It's actually pretty funny. Luke accounts this dinner as they're about to walk into it, and the disciples are having this discussion. They're like, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? Who's the best out of all? Jesus, who's going to sit at your right hand? Who's going to sit at your left hand? And so Jesus takes a step back, pauses, And the lowest thing that you could do would be the person who would wash someone else's feet. He would take off his outer garment, his priestly garment, the thing that would eventually, because of what's about to happen after this night, the thing that would be taken and it would be cast lots for. He took it off. And he got down on his knees, on his hands and knees, and poured water into a bowl and did the ultimate sign of humility and service and serving. So he goes around and he washes each person's feet. Probably gets the bowl and drags it to the necks and kneels down and washes their feet. They didn't sit in chairs probably at this particular dinner, this particular table. They're all sitting down. So Jesus on his hands and knees, he's washing their feet and he's washing their feet and he's washing their feet. Hands and feet, washing their feet. And it comes around to Peter. And I love Peter. I just want to say that. He's the guy who, when I start to feel like, okay, the Bible's a little bit too unreachable, I'm like, okay, but then there's Peter. He was kind of an idiot, just to be honest. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? I feel like Jesus was like, bro, I've literally washed 7 people's feet before I got to your feet. Like, yes, I'm about to wash your feet. He says, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him. Or he says, Lord, you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing, you do not understand, but afterwards you will understand. And so Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Now, Jesus, I think, is a little bit like, okay, how do I respond to this? Because this was really going well before this happened, right? Like, John, you're getting these details, right, dude? Like, I know this. Here's what's about to happen. Here's what's going down. And Peter says, are you going to wash my feet? Well, yeah. So you're number 7 in line, and yes, I'm about to wash your feet too, Peter. It's time to wash your feet. He says, no, you're going to never wash my feet. So Jesus says back to him, if I do not wash your feet, you have no share with me. And so Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Here's what I love about Peter. Peter has the humility to know that Jesus has no business washing his feet, but he also has the audacity to tell Jesus what to do at the same time. Right? Like, is that not our lives? We're like, Jesus, no. Like, let me submit to you. But Jesus, let me tell you how I should handle this relationship. It's like, Jesus, no. Like, I'm going to have the humility to know that I serve you and I love you and I worship you. But also, there's areas of my life, Jesus, that I know what's best for me. And so, Jesus, I know that you are king. I know that you are master. I know that you are Lord. But, Jesus, if you want to go for it, man, we're not only washing our feet, give them my hands. We can wash my head. Like, Jesus, what do you want to wash, man? Just wash the whole thing. Jesus is like, Peter. Stop for 1 second. Here's what I want you to know, Peter. He says, the one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. And so Jesus kind of throws this caveat in there. Verse 11, the narrator, John, picks up and he says, for he knew who was to betray him. And that's why he said, not all of you are clean. Now, Jesus is about to give a teaching point here. But he just told Peter, you don't know what's going on. Peter says, yeah, I know what's going on. You're about to wash my feet. You shouldn't wash my feet. And so Jesus says, well, yes, I am about to wash your feet. But if you don't wash your feet, then you're not going to understand and you're not going to get and you have no part of me. And he says, well, wash all of me. He says, Peter, you're just kind of getting this wrong. Because here's what Peter didn't understand. This was simply a symbol that Jesus would be the one who would wash everyone clean. And one of the really interesting things about kind of the rabbinical tradition as the priests would go into the temple is that they would have this big ceremonial cleaning where they would be totally clean, but at the same time, every time they would go into the temple, they would oftentimes wash their feet as this kind of ongoing cleansing process. So some of this kind of represents an ongoing cleansing process of our relationship with Jesus, but Jesus is stepping back and saying, Peter, you don't understand. This is a picture of salvation. This is a picture of the gospel. This is a picture that I have come for the purpose to serve the world, to serve the people who are with me, to serve even the people who are enemies of me. I have come for the purpose, Peter, that I would die to cleanse people of their sins. I've come that whoever would believe in me would be clean. And I know that all you see is this foot washing right now. But I'm about to blow the service of this foot washing out of the water. Because you're going to see me hung on a cross. And what's interesting is we focus on Judas in this passage. because Judas would legit betray him and have him turned over. But every single one of the disciples would betray him in the next 24 hours. Every single one of them would run away. Every single one of them would walk away. Every single one of them would deny him. Peter, who he just served, Peter's like, I'm all in, wash everything. Like a middle school girl would walk up to Peter and say, didn't you know Jesus? And he's like, whoa, I don't know who this Jesus guy is you're talking about. Jesus is standing or sitting at dinner with a room full of people who would all abandon him as he was to be betrayed on the cross. And he says, Peter, this is so much deeper than just this foot washing. This is a picture of salvation, that I have come to serve and to love you. So he pulls back and he gives this lesson, as Jesus oftentimes did. And we had washed their feet and put on his outer garment and resumed his place. He said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now, this is massive for us. I was thinking about this. We live in a time of incredible cognitive dissonance. Because the impetus of a lot of what this sermon is we should love and serve people who aren't kind to us, who are, quote unquote, our enemies, who are ideologically in opposition to us, right? I don't know that anybody walked into the church this morning and thought, man, never heard that one before. No one's like, oh, wow, I should serve people. I should love people who don't love me back. Wow, that's brand new, Ben. I'm so glad I came to church this morning. I never would have realized that. So let me ask this question. If we know that, why is it that we still create a culture where the thing that we have repeated, it's been like the refrain of all of 2020, has been just the simple fact that we've lost how to have conversations with people who disagree with us. Like not serving people who disagree with us, conversations with people who disagree with us. It reminds almost like this is a random example, and it's probably not going to connect, so I probably shouldn't use it, but this is just what comes to my mind. It's like a long time ago, people were critical of Allen Iverson, of how he was or was not at practice, and he would kill it in the game, and he's like, practice? Practice? We're talking about practice? Like not a game, we're talking about practice. Like you guys are concerned about this thing. And I feel like we kind of see this, and we're like we're not even at the game level, we're not even at the practice level. We're at a point where we can't even have conversations with people who aren't like us. Yeah, okay, cool. We know how to serve. Okay, cool, we know we should serve. You realize that most of us, if we were the people, and we saw in John chapter 8, Jesus sees this woman in adultery, caught in adultery. And it's the classic, he bends over and he starts writing people's name in the sand. They're about to kill her. He writes people's stuff in the sand, or people's name in the sand, or their sins in the sand, or the commandment in the sand. Who knows what he wrote? But he says, let he who was without sin cast the first stone. And so they all kind of walked away. Most of us would not sit down with that woman and write stuff in the sand, because we would be terrified that if people saw us doing anything on behalf of the enemy, our ideological enemy, they would think that we are in fact on their side and empowering and pushing towards their side. Think about that. How many of you, if you're on the opposite end politically, if you're on the opposite end familially, have thought, not only am I going to be okay with conversation, I am going to humble myself and I am going to serve you. If we can't even have conversations with people, that's like below the minimum rung of acceptability to Jesus. Like his point was, I want you to not just have conversations. It's not even about conversation. I want you to actively take your pride off. I want you to actively know that, yeah, maybe you're right. Sure, perhaps you're right. Jesus had all power. He had all authority. But he took that off and he served. And it's like John says, as he's recounting the story, and he says, and this is what Jesus said next. He said, a servant is not greater than his master. In other words, when we refuse to do this, we make Jesus subservient to us and place ourselves above Jesus. I don't think any of us walked in this morning thinking, man, I am so much above Jesus. But functionally, when it comes to serving the people around us, like again, the woman caught in adultery, we would think, well, I can't serve them. From a church says we can't serve them because what if we serve them, then what does it say about us? What will people assume for us? She's caught in adultery, and so if we're actually doing anything for their person and for their benefit, perhaps it will push the congregation to more of a higher level of sexual immorality. And as a congregation, honestly, our ministry partners in the community are more equipped to handle that than us. Like we would have excuses, and then we would go back and have a Bible study about how right we were in not helping and not serving and not loving. Because we're terrified of the association. And the truth is we're just insecure, which creates a false sense of pride that we're not willing to humble ourselves. And as I was reading this and I was just thinking about this, I was like, this is crazy. Really, a lot of this sparked for me as I'm reading in my personal devotion times through Romans and Romans chapter 12. It just talks about, man, serving your enemy, loving your enemy, serving your enemy. And I'm reading that thinking, man, we can't even have conversations. And we don't mean to, I think, and we don't intend to, but the reality is if you're in here and you follow Jesus, what that does is that functionally puts us in a posture, in a place, in a position where we are positioning ourselves above and ahead of Jesus. And so Jesus ends this. I love how he ends this because it's almost like I think Jesus knows. I mean, he knows us. He knows people. He knows humanity. He knows how we are. So this is how he ends it in verse 17. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Great, you know. Wow, they know it. Man, you're just so special. Wow, do you know how much you know? You're just like, who cares? Like, you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything with this. So let me ask you this. If you're a Christian, in fact, if you're here and you're not a Christian or you're online and you're not a Christian, you're just kind of tuning in and trying to figure this whole Jesus thing out, this is probably, by the way, part of the reason that you're not a Christian because you've seen stuff like this, you've heard stuff like this, and you just haven't seen Christians do it, and you're thinking, well, there's nothing different or significant or special about them. Let me ask you, if you're a Christian, like legitimately, if you're a Christian in here, you follow Jesus with your life, when was the last time you functionally did something to serve someone who you were in opposition to? When is the last time you functionally, practically served someone who is in ideological opposition, or perhaps they're actually just out to get you? Maybe you're the person like, no, I actually have an enemy. When was the last time we didn't just hear these words, but did them? For many of us, the unfortunate answer is we don't. See, when it comes to Home for the Holidays, we want to have like an easy answer of like, oh, so here's how you kind of you mitigate the interaction and you relieve the stress, and here's how you kind of carve out some space for yourself to have a good amount of awareness and help and health throughout the holidays, and that stuff might be important too. But when was the last time we actually served the people who drive us nuts? The people who ideologically are at the total opposite end. Because when we fail to serve, we make ourselves supreme. When we fail to serve, we make ourselves supreme to that person and to Jesus. So here's what I want you to do with all of that. Let me just tell you, it's not going to be fun. And there's going to be something inside of you that wants to push back. This Christmas season, you are going to face and you are going to see and you are going to find people with whom you disagree. You are going to see people, you're going to know people, your family, whoever it is with whom you disagree. I simply want you, and this is going to be a cheesy, but this is the only way I could remember this. I want you to look for opportunities to serve and bend your knee. When you find people with whom you disagree, I want you to find an opportunity to serve and bend your knee. And there's something inside you that pushes back against that, and you're thinking, I don't really want to do that. That doesn't sound, that just sounds like if I do that, they're going to think, yeah, they're right. They're going to think, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, you should do that to me. But when we do this, we embody what Jesus did, and not simply washing our feet, but ultimately dying for us. Because Jesus, and this is why I think this is such a beautiful picture, because Jesus is like, no, Peter, in order to get this, you have to really understand what's going on. You have to understand that this is the picture of the gospel. This is why understanding the gospel clearly is so important, because if we don't think we're that sinful, then Jesus' death is not that significant, and if Jesus' death is not that significant, then we don't have a significant example to serve other people. But when I realize the wretchedness of my sin, the holiness of God, the sacrifice that he made for me, because I can't unsin myself. God saw that, understood that, knew that, sent his son to die for me because of it. That payment that I could not pay because of my sinfulness, because every law that is broken requires some type of a penance to be paid. It requires some kind of a restitution. And I cannot functionally pay the restitution that I owe to God because of my sinfulness to now make me compatible with God. He's too perfect, he's too good, he's too holy. And when Jesus died on the cross for us, he was brutally sacrificed for us to serve us. He did not simply bend a knee for us, he took a Roman cross for us. And that is different. That defined the early church. That is the thing that your family won't be able to explain. That is the thing that your coworkers won't be able to explain. When you acknowledge you are different from me, and so I'm going to decide to serve you and bend my knee. I know that you think different than me. I'm going to decide to serve and bend my knee. I know that you're in opposition to me, but I'm going to decide to serve and bend my knee to you. You might walk away from it thinking, but the problem is they still have no clue what that is. They still have no clue why I did that. Well, here's the good thing. Neither did the disciples. They didn't walk away thinking, okay, I get this. I'm connecting this to the cross right now after this conversation. They had no clue. They would come back and be like, okay, so back to the who's at your left and who's at your right conversation. And so when that thing inside of you that pushes back and says, well, but that's not going to make any difference. They're not going to see it. They're not going to understand. They're going to make a connection. That's okay. Neither did the disciples of Jesus who followed him around, because they saw this happen, and then a few hours later, they all abandoned him. That does not make it any less of the call of God on our lives. So how do you function in your dysfunctional family? After you've realized that you are also a sinner just like them, when you find someone in your family with whom you disagree, you make the decision to do what your heavenly Father did for you, which is to serve them by bending your knee and washing their feet. Let's pray together. God, I pray for everybody in here who hears this, and this is wildly difficult. Because the reality of their family is that they're trying to manage this tension between loving and serving their family, and in loving and serving their family, perhaps their family taking advantage of their loving and serving them. I pray that you would give them clarity. You would give them wisdom. You would give them clarity on what this means, what this looks like. That we would love our families well, minister to our families well. Love our coworkers well, minister to our coworkers well. Love our roommates, our friends, the people we know. God, I pray that you would move us so far beyond simply being able to have a conversation. That when we see people with whom we disagree, Jesus, we would do exactly what you did, which was make the decision that though we know you and though we have your Spirit living inside of us, that will drive us not to leverage our power and our authority or our ability or the fact that maybe we're right. But when we find someone with whom we disagree, we would serve them and bend our knee. Because that's what you did, both when you washed the disciples' feet and when you hung on the cross. And God, I pray that you would help us not to be simply people in a church who knows this, but that a community would be changed, families would be changed, lives would be changed, eternities would be changed as your people, your followers, your church serves and loves a lost and a hurting and a broken world. Would you give us the wisdom and the presence of mind to acknowledge this in the moment? And when we're eyeball to eyeball with someone whom we disagree, you would give us, through the power of your Spirit, the ability to bend our knee and serve them. No, they might not get it, and they might not fully understand it. We would display you, our Heavenly Father. Give us the wisdom to know what to do, the wisdom to see the opportunity, and the courage to do it. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.